They're predictions that most data collection refinements that we can make now will be exhausted in the next few years. So I guess the question is, where do we go from here? And the answer could be synthetic data.
Yeah, sorry, I was thinking like whenever you think of like AI sort of basically creating data to train other AIs, it's almost like you kind of wonder, is it just like, recording of a videotape like multiple times and, how good is that data eventually? And I guess if you're trying to create a whole huge data set, are you still going to have a human go through it all and try and confirm it all looks accurate, or will you just use it anyway?
Who reads the privacy, things as you're signing up for an app or anything like that? I mean, you just check it and let's start using it. And I'm assuming those regulations are going to start getting pushed and pushed as we want more and more of people's datas. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Make an Impact. I'm your host, Makoto Kern. And today I've got, again, our AI stars, Brynley and Joe.
Good to be back.
Nice intro. I like it. AI stars.
And yeah, so today we'll be talking about synthetic data and its use in AI and training. So today, Brynley is going to kick us off on that topic, and excited to jump right into it.
Yeah, that sounds good. So yeah, I've always had a kind of a grasp of synthetic data, but just started researching it a bit more and just found it was pretty fascinating. So I thought it would make a great topic for us to talk about. So kind of looking at, I mean, when did we cross over into the internet age? It was like late 90s, right? That it was probably over 20 years ago that internet kind of went mainstream. And we looked at, since then, most industries have moved over to the internet or gone online. So we looked at like publishing for newspapers and magazines. They, kind of both became digital. Banking went online. Retail shifted to e-commerce. You look at TV stations into streaming platforms, or the new streaming platforms started up, and education content, you name it, like everything's shifted online. And then we looked at those old sort of chat rooms that you'd speak to people, those sort of shifted to social media, and you have just billions and billions of human interactions and thoughts and creative outlets. And it's all really creating a massive data set. And we've entered the age now of these large language models, and really these have a colossal, unrestricted, kind of untapped bank of data to train on. And this data was being acquired when most people and organizations were completely unaware that it was being collected and used for training AI. So looking in 2024 now, we're seeing AI models that have had access to almost everything that mankind has been created, at least publicly available areas. So they're predictions that most data collection refinements that we can make now will be exhausted in the next few years. So even if we can get additional data, we're pretty much exhausting all that accessible data in the next few years. So then you look at what sort of, and you've probably both heard it in the news, like more and more, I guess, a rise in the restrictions brought about by things like copyright infringement, lawsuits, legislative changes, all things that are kind of restricting the collection and use of data. I mean, you look at what are some of the big ones, like New York Times, sort of suing, saying, look, you're generating a lot of content in our tone, and you're not paying for that, so you can't use our data.
Same with Adobe, I think, right? Adobe or any of the ones that are using art and imagery.
Exactly.
It's been a big one.
Yeah.
Exactly. So it's almost like the best time was now for kind of collecting, because it was completely untapped. And now it's just more and more sort of restrictions and, I don't know, stonewalling collection of data. So I guess the question is, where do we go from here? And the answer could be synthetic data. So what synthetic data is artificially generated data, and it mimics real world data, but it's not directly obtained from real world events or measurements. And I think what we see is the potential lying in the fact that it can circumvent these copyright issues, and it can remove privacy issues, and also fill in the blanks from data sets that are not currently available. So you think there may be a lot of data sets that are private, that these sort of data scrapings or data collection processes can't actually obtain. And
Okay.
these synthetic data sets can be created using two different scenarios or techniques. So the one is generative models, and they're models called GANs, GANS, or VAEs. So techniques like generative adversarial networks or variational autoencoders. And what these basically do is generate text that mimics the style, tone, and structure of any of the real world content that they collect from. So basically, without directly copying any copyrighted content, you can get very similar data. It sounds the same, matches fairly well, but it's not infringing on that copyright. And obviously, that sort of synthetic data can be used to then train the large language models without violating any of these intellectual property laws.
But is
And
it
you've got
out of interest? Sorry, Bryn, is it generating like new data that you're mentioning earlier, like we're exhausting what's currently just publicly accessible to just scrape from? So is it still scraping from something that humans have generated, or is it generating its own data, the models
So, from
themselves? Or
my understanding, these generative adversarial networks and variational autoencoders are taking a lot of data now and almost relabeling it. So, if there are privacy issues with the data, it can mimic
yeah,
the same sort of patterns, but it can generate unique. So, if you have, let's say, a
it's
database
like
of
data laundering. And it seems
it is,
weird.
it is in a
So,
way.
yeah.
So imagine you had 500,000 contacts and they have
Mm.
certain sort of demographic representation. So it may maintain things like that, but completely rename, generate a whole lot of content
Mm.
to still be able to train systems on, but it's not violating any of those.
Yeah,
And from
yeah,
my
it doesn't actually have
understanding,
that.
filling
Mm.
in some of the blanks through the second scenario, which is called simulated scenarios. So basically, organizations can create synthetic data sets by simulating real world scenarios. So something we'll
Mm.
look at is like customer service interactions. You may be able to actually simulate with the data, like we've seen with the generative models. You're able to sort of generate new content based on assumptions of what a user could be doing and what you've maybe seen in other data sets. So things like customer service interactions, medical consultations, legal discussions, those could all be private data that no one is willing to provide at the moment, but you can have these simulated scenarios that could say, well, if you had this court case and you did this and this, these could be the outcomes. Therefore, it could train it on what you want to do in those scenarios. Really, what you can do is sort of tailor those data sets to specific use cases. So again, ensuring that no copyright sort of infringements take place. I just picked a couple. There are a
Mm.
lot of different examples that I found. I picked a couple of the interesting ones. So I just got three that I wanted to chat through. The first was improving conversational AI with diverse interaction scenarios. So, we've been working on sort of chatbot related AI implementations, and you may often get sort of edge cases that a chatbot could struggle with. So there's not particular data about how you'd handle a certain case. So often you'd be able to have a solution that you could generate this sort of synthetic dialogue data that would cover these rare or unusual scenarios. And then the AI models can be trained to handle a wider variety of interactions, which is really useful.
Mm.
So you may have
Okay.
there's the subset, but you simulate a whole lot more. So an example is creating synthetic customer support conversations that involve complex problem solving or cultural nuances not well represented in existing data. And that kind of goes into the, if we're thinking of all the data that's been collected to date, you have all those biases and some of the differences in culture that may make certain answers imbalanced. And what's nice is if this can be controlled, you have data sets that will circumvent those biases as well. So you're getting more useful
Mm.
balanced data to actually train models on, which I think
Interesting. So yeah, just to understand it, it's really you've got a model. It can answer questions like you're using it for customer service, as you're saying, and you want to augment it because you've noticed it's responding to in certain situations, responding in a way that you don't want it to for certain users that might be using it. So instead of like trying to fix it maybe with prompts or trying to add in a whole bunch of contextual data for each reply for it to like try and understand how to reply. You can actually just rather train the model itself with data that you didn't necessarily have in the beginning. So you may have like, transcripts of your last 5 years of customer service interactions. But let's say now you're entering a new market, for instance, in a whole new region, and you want to match the tone of what users in that region expect. Instead of having to go, okay, well, wow, how do we do this now? You can, as you just say, sort of augment that whole data set and sort of, modify
Correct.
it to
Correct.
match the tone that you want, and then train your model with that instead. So you don't have to sort of, recreate all that data from scratch. That's really interesting. Yeah, it's sort of
So it's
augmentation.
pretty powerful as well when you think of all the data that's missing at the moment and how difficult it is to get that. I think there's sort of people are on the fence as to it's either going to make models way better, or it's going to, if it's not done correctly, it's going to generate a lot of junk that is maybe not helpful. But
Yeah,
I can see
whenever you
the
think of
positives.
Yeah, sorry, I was thinking like whenever you think of like AI sort of basically creating data to train other AIs, it's almost like you kind of wonder, is it just like recording of a videotape like multiple times, and how good is that data eventually? And I guess if you're trying to create a whole huge data set, are you still going to have a human go through it all and try and confirm it all looks accurate, or will you just use it anyway? It's kind of interesting to see, like, and it's hard to tell, I guess, too, when you're training a model. I mean, you have your test cases against it to see if it's matching the output that you expect, but you can't really test against everything. Yeah, just
But
trying to
what I
think.
really like about it, and why I feel it's promising, is from what we've seen working with data sets, you may have everything represented in some form, but it isn't explicitly almost written out. And what I see, you could take your data and you say, well, we'll build scenarios around this, and it's really giving you an expansion of your data. Everything's there, but it's been said in possibly a briefer form. And the fact that you're giving more data there just means that you can map out those scenarios and you can check, and even if it's through, for smaller data sets, definitely through some sort of review, you could actually get where you need to be a lot quicker with potentially more accuracy than if you had someone actually writing that out and trying to capture it all. So
What's interesting, and I'm just thinking in a real world scenario, one of our impacts clients, I listen to customer service calls. We do it every so often, and we listen to what they have to say. And it's interesting, the people that are on those calls, we listen to the interaction between the actual customer service person and the customer, and you hear the complaints and you hear the responses of the management where they say, oh, they've got to follow this type of script, this is what they should say when this happens. And right away you can see, you can either create something that either works along with the human being as they're interacting, saying, oh, basically everybody almost has similar issues where they don't understand why something happened, what the confusion of what they thought was going to be the price of something now all of a sudden is now more expensive once they're a customer. That type of misunderstanding seems to happen quite a bit. And it's just, as you're approaching that, you could probably simulate based on just psychological kind of like the comments that are being made as a conversation is happening, to tell AI like, hey, this person saying this, you look at it, somebody who's actually new doesn't know how to handle the response quite well just yet. Oh, I know I'm supposed to say this or that, but how you say it is so important. And so the AI can navigate the person who's using it, who's the customer service, to tell, hey, this is what we mean by this. This is what you meant by that. Because there might be a misunderstanding, because a lot of customer service are now offshore. So they're interacting with people who are within a different country, and they don't know the nuances between that. So I think there's a lot of potential there, just because if you're going to leverage the different ways in which people speak and how they pick up on that, and then just prompting them, there's a potential.
Yeah. That's good points.
It's also interesting to think about, personality with AI is always like it makes a big difference if you're chatting to something that seems to have a personality instead of just robotic responses. And that can become a very, demographically appropriate thing to use. Certain demographics, even younger people will expect, maybe a more vibey sort of interaction, but someone, in their older age may want just something a bit more formal and a bit more to the point. But trying to come up with how you can have a model that has that sort of new terminology that maybe our kids are using or young people are using, which existing data sets don't have. But you can't exactly create that. You have to sort of simulate that with synthetic data. It's sort of like another use case and just trying to
Yeah, exactly.
trying to get
I'm
that
assuming,
personality into.
yeah,
Be interesting to see how that would work.
I don't want to jump the gun because I know you've got two more examples, but I'm assuming anything that comes with medical or legal, or even retail, you're going to, there's obviously privacy issues, but who reads the privacy, things as you're signing up for an app or anything like that? I mean, you just check it and let's start using it. And I'm assuming those regulations are going to start getting pushed and pushed as we want more and more of people's datas. Like, oh, we just won't put your name in the medical thing. There are HIPAA laws and things like that that
That's
supposedly
it.
protect us. Same with legal, but I
And
think,
that's some of the synthetic
yeah,
data services are exactly that. It's pretty much scrubbing. It's still getting, if you have massive data sets, it's still getting those same trends out of them, but it's not using any private information. So you could feed your database into that, and they would say, right, they're going to run a simulation and convert it to, to have the same real world trends in it. No one is recognizable in that set, which
then
is
somebody has to
interesting.
regulate the regulation for that.
Exactly.
And make sure they're not taking too much. Oh, wait, you took too much of that one data set.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, you were mentioning medical as well, and that was sort of the second, what is it, application would be kind of emerging technologies and generating training data for those. So you look at fields like quantum computing or new medical treatments, and they often lack that sufficient sort of real world data, either because they're new or they have proprietary research that can't be shared. So the solution there is kind of generating this synthetic data to simulate the outcomes, processes, or even interactions in these kind of emerging fields.
Would
So,
would biomedical companies, and I've got a friend that runs a biomedical company, and that is a big thing, is to have scientists on staff to test for whatever you're trying to make, but having the ability, almost like with UX, you wanted to create a wireframe, you want to test out a simulation of what you want to build. Is this an application of the same thing where they can create fake data and say, oh, this cancer drug or this weight loss drug simulation, fake data or synthetic data shows that it actually works, there's no side effects, or there's a certain percentage, and that will at least get them to a point of getting investment, say, hey, look, these synthetic tests are showing promise,
yep.
and that helps them to get to that point.
Yeah, exactly. So it's pretty fascinating. And I mean, you look at the benefits on solutions like that to obviously allow AI models to be trained and developed in these cutting edge fields, and just accelerating the innovation, and things like cancer research and all those. It's so vital that if we can just speed up the processes, we can get better treatments, and so it could be a great kind of industry for that as well. And then the last one I had was expanding training data for visual AI. We've seen things like, we chatted about the Soras and things before, where they've mentioned, look, you'll see video generated with 6 fingers on the hand. And that's because there's not a lot of valuable reference images for the AI to work from, or a walking cycle. You may not have enough images. And that's where synthetic data can also be used. And actually, where they've often struggled to have a large amount of labeled data, it's really time consuming. They often need to be sort of put together manually, as a result, pretty costly. The solution is then to have these images and videos generated to augment these existing visual data sets. So an example would be like creating synthetic images of a product in various different environments or conditions that you maybe don't have well represented in the real world. And it obviously, just then improves the performance of the visual AI models, and they can recognize and process a much wider variety of objects, scenes, context, that sort of thing.
I'd imagine you still need a human to like do a pass through that content it generates, right? So let's go with an example where you want your AI to draw hands, right? And it keeps drawing 6 fingers. So you go, okay, let me use synthetic data. Well, let's say there's 2 options here. Either I could go and buy 10,000 images of human hands that have been, photographed over the years, and find some huge database out there and get the images and spend $10,000 buying those, or I could use an AI to generate all of these images for me and then pass that over to the model, which is specifically tasked to generate hands, right? But if you're using them, if it's struggling to do that to begin with, that means that the other model probably also struggles with trying to like generate those hands, right? Because that just is like the fundamental issue. Otherwise, you just use another model to do the task for you. But it can probably do 20,000 images and maybe 15,000 are correct, right? So you want to then move those 15,000 correct ones over to the model, which is, as synthetic data, which is now accurate. But you still need a human to go through all that, right? And probably vet all those images. I'm just trying to think like practically how you would make sure that this data is correct. That's what I'm kind of struggling to.
I mean, off the top of my head,
sort of you
think, all right, if you're doing the hands, then you'd potentially want to be able to, have a 3D model of a hand and, give it different kind of poses and things, and then go and generate 50,000 images of all different scenarios that a hand can be writing, which, then you could still go through and improve, but it's way quicker than saying, all right, now set out and go and take all those pictures. And once you got the basics, I'd imagine it would go pretty well. So,
pretty cool.
Yeah, the applications are things like autonomous driving, retail analytics, surveillance, which is pretty cool. Yeah, so we need to ensure that synthetic data is really high quality, representative, and free from harmful biases. And I think if we're going to use synthetic data, the best balance would probably be to combine it with real world data and maybe some form of validation process just to help us create more reliable and ethically sound large language models in the future.
Great.
Yeah, sounds good.
Well, thanks for joining us on today's episode of Make an Impact. That was a good wrap up and conversation about synthetic data and AI. And tune in next time. We'll be talking something very interesting on our next podcast. And everyone take care. And don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button. All right. See you soon.
Catch you soon.
Thanks.
Bye.